Hello and welcome to Live at Epiphan. This is a very special show. This is our end of year show where we love to play around and talk about predictions. This time I have a very special guest joining me, Nick Milani, who is fairly new to Epiphan. Nick, tell the people who you are and what you're doing here.
Yeah, thanks, George, and appreciate you having me on. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say in the industry. Really excited to be here and joined Epiphan about 6 months ago and came in to help with some of the marketing, some product strategy, and just overall strategy with the business. And it's a great place to be and couldn't be happier to be on board. And I love that you've invited me in for your year-end show, and we'll see how wildly wrong I can be with all my predictions because you know I have opinions and I'm not afraid to be wrong, so this should be fun.
Yeah, well, that's actually what makes you perfect for this type of a show, right? Because you've spent so much time in that 6 months studying the market, what's going on out there. And so I think this is going to be an excellent way to look back a little bit on what some of the things we said last year and how wildly wrong we may have been, but also looking forward at the exciting future of 2022 and beyond. So, as always, of course, feel free to say hi in the chat, follow, like, subscribe, and all those social things. You guys all know about that. And see what you think of some of this and leave it in the comments. So let's jump into looking at last year's predictions. Now, we're not going to go through all of them. We wanted to highlight a couple and really focus on those because these are maybe some of the bolder ones. And let's talk about where we went wrong. So the first one, we had a big prediction that remote video production as a service was going to continue to grow. Nick, what do you think about that? What did you see in 2021 on that?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. You know, I came from a world of primarily video conferencing, and I think there's been a gap between video conferencing and broadcast. And what we're seeing is that gap being fulfilled by local production studios, both in-house bespoke studios, but often, you know, one of the interesting dynamics is we're starting to see for rent studios popping up everywhere. I mean, heck, right in your backyard, we've just met some folks. And that's a huge marketplace that's going to continue to grow and evolve, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think so as well. This is definitely a prediction I think that could just, carry forward into 2022, but we have a bunch more we'll talk about. But yeah, absolutely right. I think that's definitely
one of the things
something we saw.
One of the things I found fascinating about that space, George, is that it's empowering a lot of folks that haven't historically had access to video production. So, what we're seeing is real estate agents going in and doing weekly broadcasts. We're seeing, all types of folks go in and use those studios on kind of an hourly basis. And then, very quickly and efficiently producing great quality content that reflects their brand. So I think that's a great market and we'll see it continue to expand. And, most of them are built around Epiphan, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. So the other prediction, somewhat related, is we had a fairly bold prediction that SRT as a streaming protocol will skyrocket in popularity, become more ubiquitous. I think we might have missed a little on this one, Nick. What do you think?
Well, I think skyrocket. I mean, look, with the engineers and the nerds that I talked to, it has just gone through the roof. People couldn't be more excited.
For sure.
Much like the Gartner hype cycle, it might be in that peak of inflated expectations right now, but truthfully, it always starts with the engineers, and there is a lot of reason to be excited about this protocol and this approach. And as we start to see it working its way down into peripherals, there's a lot of things that can start to come out of that. And ultimately, it's a huge focus for us in the new year is to think about our cloud tools and how we start to aggregate those SRT feeds and help people add value out of them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. You're right. The nerds and the people who understand this stuff under the hood are really excited about it. That's how I deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and everyone I talk to at that level is super stoked on it. But you're right. At the surface, at people who maybe not live and breathe this stuff, they still don't really know what it is until it gets into that actual, I don't want to say consumer grade, but at that kind of entry of the products. So that's always an interesting one to see. So we were maybe a little off on the skyrocket part, but it did grow. And I think maybe 2022 is the skyrocket, to the moon. I don't know.
We'll see. I think it's going to be a slow build, but we're going to get there.
For sure. The other one that we wanted to talk about from last year, and again, somewhat related, is that major events would continue to be produced online even once we had a cure, treatment, vaccine for all of the stuff we've been struggling with the past 2 years. I think this one we probably got right from what we've seen. Unfortunately, this is maybe the bad news one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't control what we can't control, but I think what we're going to see out of this prediction, if we focus on the truth, is that live events and online, that hybrid is everyone the biggest buzzword out there, it's not going away. And it's a simple reason. It drives inclusivity.
Yeah.
And I think as a society and as technologists, anytime we're driving inclusivity, we're making information more accessible to more people. That's our mission. That's our goal. And there's altruistic point to that. I think it's really powerful. So we're going to continue to see that grow regardless of what happens with the pandemic and what's out of our control. I think it's a good prediction.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm kind of excited to see how that continues to evolve, because we did see a pretty interesting evolution in the past year of that. And you're absolutely right. It's easy to just be disappointed and sad and bummed out by it, but in the reality, you're right. As technology people, we have a lot to offer here that could really unlock those doors. And so we'll see how that goes. And we had one last prediction. This one I can guarantee we absolutely nailed. And I really hope this is the last time I ever have to bring this up. Everyone who watches this show knows I probably beat on this one a lot. And that is that video conferencing setups will continue to be trash. Sadly, I would say from my perspective, this was true, as much as I really hoped it wouldn't be.
Well, I will say, as the new kid on the block, it's been pretty intimidating coming into Epiphan and seeing your guys' setups. As we can all attest to, it's been a bit of a scramble for me to get my setup here today, just because it is a little bit tricky, and that's a little bit of the state of the industry, right? It isn't intuitive and easy yet. That's a maturation process that I think everybody's going through, and as we continue to understand the importance, of looking great, and then also as the technology becomes easier and more approachable, I think we're going to see improvements there. But it is total trash. And what blows me away, by the way, is you go into these world-class productions on TV, and they're bringing in remote participants, and they're horrible. In fact, our pediatrician, we're in the New York City area, our pediatrician goes on NBC Nightly News, and it makes me cringe because she's clearly got her iPad on her kitchen island, shooting up her nose, and it's not flattering for anybody, and it's a big distraction, and you're like, just a little bit of help there. And honestly, this is where, if you're watching this show, if you can take our content and help push it to friends and family that need to learn how to do good setups.
Exactly. We've tried to help. Obviously, we need to do more to help, because, it's still pretty rough out there.
Takes a village.
But
Takes a village.
Exactly. That was a little bit of a look back on last year's predictions. Of course, we love to make new predictions. We're going to try something a little bit new because, kind of a callback to some of the things we just talked about. Nick and I are remote from each other. So in the past, we've picked things out of a hat. But of course, we're not in person, so there isn't a physical hat to pick from. So we're going to spin a wheel and pick from our list of predictions here, just to throw a little fun in there, mix it up a bit. So we have a bunch of predictions we want to go through. Nick, I'm really, really interested to hear your thoughts on this, as you've spent so much time looking forward these days. So I'm going to spin the wheel. We're going to see where it lands. We're going to talk about that prediction. Let's jump into it. First one coming up here. Super fun wheel. Oh, what's it going to be? Prediction number 1. That's weird. This was randomized, but we're going to go with number 1. Prediction number 1. Streaming protocols. The end of RTMP. The rise of things like H.265 as the common standard. And maybe looking forward to other compression types like H.266. What do you think about that, Nick?
Well, I think I have 20 years of technology experience starting with Motorola, and I've loved how the acronyms continually progress, right? If it was 802.11a, B, they skipped over a bunch of letters, we jumped to G, then you're at X. Nobody really knows what it means half the time, but we love to talk about those letters. And it's I think it's going to continue to evolve. And what are we seeing fundamentally? We're seeing better compression so that we can get more across the existing pipe, and we're seeing higher fidelity. And I just think those two trends are going to continue to exist. The third dynamic of that is the latency. And I think as we start to teeter and understand how those three aspects work together, we're going to see this evolution. And obviously, from a product standpoint, we're excited to start announcing H.265 in the new year with HEVC coming to our product lineup. And that's hugely important for a lot of our customers that are bandwidth starved, trying to get content out to the web so they can get it out to a stream. And we just we'll continue to be cutting edge in that space and continue to ride the wave.
And that's a super optimistic outlook. So I'm going to play the pessimist now this time. Um, it's funny because you're absolutely right that all these things are good, but we have been held back a little bit by some of these other things. Like I mentioned, RTMP, right? Some of these new technologies simply can't be used over some of these legacy protocols like RTMP. But at the same time, RTMP is such an easy barrier for people to enter this space that I kind of think it's going to hang on, to be honest. As much as I want to see it die, I kind of feel like it's going to hang in there a little longer.
Well, there's a simple theory in technology that nothing ever dies. It just gets smaller and smaller. And by the way, go Google the number of pagers that are still in the United States or North America. There are tons of pagers because people need to get access to information when they're underground. So facsimiles, you name it. And you're right, it won't go away, but we'll continue to promote and drive the advancements that help improve the experience. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
10 years ago, they said VGA was dead, and
right.
you still see it, right?
Exactly.
So let's spin the wheel again, get to our next prediction. What's it going to be? Who's going to be the winner here? If this ends up on 2, I'm going to be mad. Number 5. And I actually forgot to remove number 1 earlier, but I'm going to remove 5 from the wheel here. Number 5. This is a fun one, and I think people might have some strong opinions about this. The future of television. Shows as a whole are changing. And I think we've seen this a bit already, and I think we're going to see this change a lot going forward. We're starting to see a lot more television that is kind of almost like just devolving into video podcasts on TV, right?
Kind of. It's everywhere. I mean, between that and reality shows, it seems to be the only thing that's out there. I wouldn't want to be a broadcast executive right now thinking about programming because you're getting threatened by all these kind of, there's an asymmetrical war going on here with a lot of content being generated at the local level that competes with the major broadcasts now. Yeah. And the major broadcasts are trying to figure out how to be efficient with creating the content. And so I think you see a lot of, if you turn on your favorite sports channel here in the States, it's going to look a lot like what we're doing right now with some role in the background. And that seems to be the methodology that everybody's following.
Outside of that, I would say, again, struggling as a traditional major broadcast network, because the streaming platforms, they've maybe figured out this efficiency key. They've shifted to everything is a miniseries, everything is bingeable as a critical component, which you can't do on traditional television. And, just pumping out content that way, as opposed to trying to compete in that talk show space, if you will. So it's interesting to see the dynamic changing between that traditional television moving more the podcast talk show style as their realm, and the streaming platforms absolutely killing it in that miniseries, high quality, but very short. Not, I remember back in the day as traditional television series used to be, 20 plus, 30 plus, 50 plus episodes a year.
Right.
And it's not anymore.
Yeah. It's funny. We went back and watched Friday Night Lights. The first season of it was something like 26 episodes. My wife and I constantly were like, when does this thing end? Like, it's just unheard of these days. And it's pretty interesting. But, of course, what's old is new, right? Now I start to hear young people talking about how, I can't wait for the release of Ted Lasso this week. You're like, no longer are they releasing in binge. They're releasing in the mode to draw you back in. So, I think this is going to be all about variety and freedom of choice moving forward.
Absolutely. All right, let's go for another spin here. See where we land. If we get number 1 again, I'm going to remove it and spin again. We didn't. We got number 6-ish? Yeah, 6. All right. Number 6 is a fun one here. Kind of calls back a little bit to last year's predictions, but number 6, the virtual event industry will continue to grow. And this kind of carries forward a little bit of what we talked about from last year. Basically, virtual event planners has become a profession. You search for ideas, and I ran into this trying to think of ideas for a virtual party. You search for like virtual party, and you come up now not with, hey, this is cool, I did this. It's hire me to do it for you. It's totally changed in a year in terms of that.
Yeah, I think it's indicative of kind of a macro trend of humanity, right? When crisis happens, it forces people to evolve, and within that, there's opportunities. So you're seeing a lot of opportunistic business folks out there, whether it's the pop-up production studios we started with, or this type of idea, which is, at the core of it, though, is organizations now realize that they have an ability to reach their audience in new and meaningful ways. And while video conference was easy to adopt, that was the goal, it doesn't necessarily serve the need to project a brand and to push a brand quality type event into the world. And so I think this is just ripe for disruption, and these virtual events will continue to see them explode. And also we tend to think of virtual events as being this big, live event. We conjure up the idea of a dealer event, or I want to do something where I would traditionally physically bring people together. The other aspect is now when we think about virtual events, we think about this new category, which is, again, a half step above video conferencing, which corporate town halls that we'll be doing this Friday for our organization, right? And talking through, being able to present that with a high quality, but without having to burden it with all the people, staff, production that's required to do it traditionally.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Nick. The big buzzword, everyone's talking about it, hybrid, right? That's the one to keep an eye on. So, yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. But yeah, if you're an opportunistic person and you think you can run a virtual event, you might be on the ground floor of some serious potential.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, we're spinning again here, spinning the wheel. What are we going to land on? All right, this is starting to work out a little better. Going to get up here to number 3. This is an interesting one, especially because we did see some stuff even in the past couple of weeks here, but more streaming-related mergers and acquisitions within the business side. Now, this is maybe not the most exciting one for most people watching, but for those of us, and I know, Nick, this is something you pay close attention to as well, in the business world, this is a big deal. And we saw a ton already in 2021, and I kind of think it's going to continue.
Yeah, I think it's natural that it will. I mean, as we talk about this, crisis evolves into opportunity. We see a lot of companies going out and testing. Very quickly, winners and losers will start to sort out of that, and we'll start to see some consolidation. And we'll also start to see evolution of the platform, which requires kind of tucking in different components of it. And so I think this is an area that will be very exciting in the new year. There's also kind of maybe some negative undertones in the space right now as well around supply chain issues. And maybe it doesn't, we talked about streaming related mergers and acquisitions, but obviously we support a pro AV and a broadcast channel. And I think those supply chain disruptions are going to start to get the better of some companies in the new year, and that might force them into an acquisition position that they wouldn't have necessarily done. So I think 2022 is going to be filled with tons of disruption, and ultimately it will serve the industry as a whole as we move forward.
And I think also there's an element of people trying to build out a bigger portfolio for themselves, right? Like a company that might not currently have a lot of presence in the cloud, it's going to be far easier for them to try and just acquire that through acquisition instead of building it from scratch. And I think that's going to play a role too, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And I think we already did see that in 2021.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty fair to say we'll see some more of that one. So if someone has some wild guesses on who's going to be the next to merge or acquire, throw it in the comments. We would love to hear some gambling on that. Maybe we'll put up a pool somewhere.
Sounds like a great idea.
All right, we're going to go for another spin here. And again, if number 1 comes up, I'm just going to delete it, but we're not going to be there. We're going to be on number 4. Number 4. Well, actually, this is probably a good one. Excellent segue wheel. Thank you so much. Number 4 is that supply chain issues will lead to...
Well, I guess I already had the first production there. So maybe some bankruptcies and some acquisitions, unfortunately. I mean, it's just a reality. It's causing massive cash flow challenges with a lot of companies. And I started my career in the automotive industry with, I mentioned Motorola. I'm working with General Motors and Ford. A buddy of mine has a dealership. You look at what's going on right now in Detroit. You can't drive around, by the way, and see it. Ford F-150s are parked everywhere in parking lots because they're missing a critical component to actually go sell them. Well, somebody has to hold that bag of money. And Ford has deep enough pockets to do that. But as we start to think about kind of the channel that supports our business and the broader kind of pro AV and broadcast areas, that's gonna put some people in some pretty tough spots. And you hate to see that happen to anybody, but I think it's just a reality of as this thing starts to trickle down and cause some cash flow problems. We're going to see consolidation as a result.
Yeah, and I was talking to a friend of mine that works in the custom PC space, and he was pointing out, he's like, "Listen, business was great last year. It was
Hmm.
amazing, record year." He's like, "But can you imagine if I actually had product to sell, how much better it would have
Yeah.
been?" Because he has nothing. He has no stock to sell. Everyone's aware of the GPU supply issues in the computer space. Can you imagine if there was enough supply to sell the demand? It would be crazy. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, a little bit unpredictable, I think. It means, yeah, there could be a lot of money to be made as markups increase in some cases, and in other cases, just lack of supply means you can't, your operation capital disappears. So it'd be interesting.
Here's the good news is that I think it's universally affecting all markets and all
Yes.
things. I mean, you see it in real estate, you see it in food, you see it in oil, gas, cars. I mean, it's across the board. So it's not like our industry is being exposed to it in a negative way. In fact, as you point out, our industry is actually being exposed to a lot of positive macro trends. So there is opportunity. We just might need to be a little bit patient in how long it takes us to realize some of that revenue. And at the end of the day, having a strong executive leadership manage through it will be critical. And
Yeah.
it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah, and not to be the downer on it, but it's very possible it could get worse before it gets better, but let's hope not.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, another spin here. I forgot to remove number 4, so this better just land on number 2. Uh,
Oh, number
we get number
two,
4 again.
perfect.
So we'll just continue talking about the supply chain problem. Uh, no, we'll give this another spin. We have to carry through with the wheel, even though it's a 50-50.
Yeah, you're committed to
It's
this thing here. I'm
very committed to
surprised.
the
I would
wheel.
have just said, "Oh, number two," and moved on. Okay, good.
This is how. Oh, look at that, number 2. Uh, this is an interesting one. I think this is definitely one people should keep an eye on. The metaverse will explode. Now, I don't think I mean necessarily the Zuckerberg metaverse, but in a more generic sense, the metaverse has all these different elements, the AR, the VR, all these things. Nick, where do you land on that one?
Well, look, I mean, you got people at home, captive audience, and you got a lot of money getting poured into this thing. And we've already seen how addicting social tools can be. And if anybody's mastered that, it's the meta, right? So they'll
Yeah.
lead the charge. They're throwing a ton of money behind it. And it makes sense. I mean, I think this immersive experience and driving human connection when people aren't together. That's a powerful aspect of it. It scares the hell out of me in some ways that we'll lose
Sure.
touch with reality. And I think that's part of the challenge we have is we're seeing it already with deep fakes, right? The blending of reality and augmentation. And frankly, I think about my children and I think about like they're going to be natives of augmented and virtual reality.
Of the metaverse.
Well,
of the
they'll
Matrix.
exactly they'll never know anything different. So 15,
Yeah.
20 years from now, will you be able to separate the difference between what's fiction and reality? Who knows? But it is definitely a powerful thing, and it's going to grow massively.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, I'm not really a VR guy at all, and that's just I'm one of those guys who gets sick in VR. It's just not my thing. But even just watching, we experimented a couple weeks ago with it. Go back and watch a previous episode of this show to look at us playing with metaverse stuff. I'm actually kind of impressed at how quickly some of my colleagues have come around to this idea. They say the experience is amazing, and so I kind of look forward to the hardware aspect improving, so that people like me who suffer from, VR related motion sickness and frame rates that make us puke can participate, which is obviously a barrier for some. So it's interesting. And maybe we're seeing it in businesses first with these virtual spaces. We'll see.
I think you're going to see it in gaming communities and within the youth group to begin with. I think you'll see it expand out. It'll originate as a social interaction tool that'll then expand. Commercially, we'll try to fumble around for 5 years. We'll try to figure out what it all means. But there'll be early bets and a lot of noise, right? This is, again, going back to that Gartner hype cycle. This is at the peak of inflated expectations. This is going to be all hype for a while. And the dust settles, we'll start to figure out how it has a meaningful relationship to our lives.
So I have last one I want to throw in here because, we've actually touched on something a number of times, both in previous predictions from last year and a couple of the ones we've talked about that we're thinking about for next year. So I want to just throw this out there at you, Nick, because this is kind of just off the top here. Wasn't in our wheel or our script, but corporate video studios as a product, as a service, becoming mainstream, becoming normalized. I think, we've touched on that already, and it's just, that sounds like it's a thing these days.
Well, I'll tell you what I believe truly is the what needs to shift actually has nothing to do with technology or capabilities. It has to do with workflows. I think right now there's a big barrier when we think about the labor associated with creating a broadcast quality event. And as we start to see automation tools and virtualization and making the technology and the space more approachable by prosumers, then all of a sudden we're going to start to unlock this capability so that a manager or marketing coordinator can actually run a studio within an organization, because the desire is there. The challenge right now is the barrier is too large when you try to do these things. And so you kind of have this moment where I think truly it goes back to what we talked about with people looking like trash on video conferencing. At some point, people are like, I want to look better, but I got to get on with my day. I got too much stuff going on to pause and beat this up and stay in this headspace. So as a lot of those factors change, I think there's going to be a massive movement in there. And frankly, just meeting with some customers across the globe, we're seeing a ton of interest in organizations and corporations projecting their brand externally and in making meaningful engagement with their end customers. And there's some fascinating opportunities there.
And like you touched on, I think their objective is they are all kind of sick of the conferencing looking like trash. And as you mentioned earlier, Nick, there is this gap in between video conferencing and more traditional broadcast expectations. Mm-hmm. And filling the gap there is really what we're talking about. And there's a big gap, but a huge potential gap too. And we've seen some people doing it as a service already. Our friend over at gman.tv, mm-hmm. we've talked about on this show before. He's doing this as a service, super simple, studio setups that people can come in and rent. And, his business is kicking into high gear, and the people using it are from places you might not imagine. But this is things that can be done internally too if you need a higher amount of resourcing on it, right? So there's a lot here. And for me, I think this is a big potential and a big prediction that this is going to be a very standardized thing. Again, I say it all the time. If you're a company and you're not doing video yet, you probably should be. And this is probably the way to do it.
Well, so, let's take it more broadly, too. I mean, house of worship, funeral homes, education, sporting events. A buddy of mine just this weekend texted me and said his son was playing in a volleyball game in Detroit, Michigan, and said, hey, hop on the live stream and see him play. I mean, exactly. We just haven't caught up to the imagination, or the imagination of the industry hasn't caught up to the capabilities of the technology. And that's where I'm so excited to be here and be at Epiphan, because I think we're at the center of that kind of revolution.
Yeah. So that's our predictions, folks. Let us know what you think in the comments. But I think we have some pretty interesting ones here. And maybe not as heavy as like the raw technical stuff as we've had in the past. A lot of this, actually, I think you mentioned it there, Nick, the creativity. A lot of this revolves around that for the future, which is, to me, very exciting because it's new things, new ways of leveraging stuff going forward. So that's exciting. Thank you for joining us. Again, of course, let us know what you think of these predictions. Are we totally wrong? Are we way off base? Do we miss something? Throw your predictions into the comments. We would love to see them. And we'll find out in a year who's right and who's wrong and who owes who a case of what. So obviously, as we go into 2022, we appreciate everyone who's been watching live at Epiphan throughout the years. We have a lot more in store for you going forward. So please stay tuned, stay subscribed, stay following, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much, and thanks, Nick,